St. Paul writes, "I want you to know, beloved, that what has happened to me has actually helped to spread the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to everyone else that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers and sisters, having been made confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, dare to speak the word with greater boldness and without fear." Most scholars believe that the letter to the Philippians was written in the last stage of Paul's life, probably from Rome, where he is imprisoned awaiting the trial that would finally lead to his execution. And Paul, knowing what lies ahead, begins to write this letter of gratitude to the Philippian church for their support in this dire time. Paul looks back on his life and on the promises of God. In the book of Romans, written anywhere from 5 to 8 years earlier, he gave the great promise, "For we know that all things work for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose." And now, in Rome, in prison, waiting for what would be his final trial, St. Paul realizes that the promise has been kept. "I want you to know, beloved, that what has happened to me has actually helped spread the gospel." St. Paul has trusted in the promise that God will be at work in his life no matter what. Even when it appears that evil is triumphing, God will be at work for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose, and that was Paul. And now he sees the promise fulfilled. I began to wonder about that, and I began to consider that perhaps that's what faith really is. Faith is seeing the promises of God fulfilled in our lives so that we dare to trust God to meet us in the future. St. Paul looks back on his life and sees how, in fact, God has shaped all that has happened for the sake of the gospel. And now in prison, when it would appear that all the doors are closing, God has opened the windows, and what Paul had most longed for, that Christ would be made known to the world, is in fact made possible through his imprisonment and the impending trial. Perhaps that's why we come to church. We come to church to be reminded of the promises of God. We come to church as a place where we can not only reflect on God's word, but in so doing, see how God has proven faithful in our past. Like Paul, we claim the promises, and then we look back and see how God has kept God's promises to us. Faith is simply the experience of God keeping his promises and then boldly stepping into the future, trusting that as God has met us in the past, so God will meet us in the future. That's what Paul does in the Philippian letter. Never doubt the promises of God. I hope you'll take time to reflect on how many of God's promises you have personally experienced as being fulfilled in your life. I am.
Thank you for watching Insight. You can view the previous episode and please subscribe to our channel by clicking the link below.